Hello everybody, welcome to part 11 of the Star Wars Legends Chronological Review series. Today we're going to finish the story that we started last time in part 10 with the Tales of the Jedi Fall of the Sith Empire comics, but we also are going to continue the story of the Sith with the Lost Tribe of the Sith short story collection as well as the novel Cross Currents. It's going to be a bit of a long one, so I hope you guys are strapped in. Starting with issue 1 of the Fall of the Sith Empire comics, we pick up where we left off from Golden Age of the Sith number 5, as Jory Daragon makes it back to Sinagar, only to be arrested for all of the crimes that she and her brother had committed before they left. Her ship is confiscated as collateral, and she is imprisoned and put to trial right away. Elsewhere on Sinagar, Odin reunites with Empress Teta and his master Uru to discuss their visions of the returning Sith Empire. The Empress tells the Jedi that while Coruscant doesn't take their concerns very seriously, she still has a whole fleet and army left over from the Unification Wars, and that she's prepared to fight the Sith herself. Back on Korriban, Nagasato rebuilds his fortress after the attack from Ludo Kresh and begins to allure Gav Daragon to the dark side with the glory of the Sith Empire, saying that the Republic failed him and his sister and that it would be better if the Sith Empire ruled the galaxy instead. Ludo Kresh's ship comes back to Sato's fortress in an attempt to counterattack, and Sato tricks Gav into pressing the button that destroys Kresh's ship. Moving on to issue 2, Jory's trial doesn't go so well for her. She's sent to the world of Ronika to become a forced laborer, and the merchant Skahur reveals that he's keeping her ship, along with its navicomputer, which is holding the coordinates that lead to Gav and the Sith on Korriban. Jory actually manages to escape her forced servitude on Ronika by stealing an ore-hauling ship, and she manages to break into Empress Teta's palace on Sinagar. Now, the Empress and the Jedi can finally hear everything that she has to say. Meanwhile, the Sith prepare their fleets for war, and Nagasato continues to try and convince Gav that his conflict of the Republic is justified because of how the Republic failed him and his sister. Starting issue 3, Skahur takes Starbreaker 12 out for a joyride, but as he does, the Sith fleet arrives and they destroy his ship, which upsets Gav, but Nagasato assures him that no human life forms were aboard. The Sith strike the Republic everywhere at once, including Coruscant, where Mehmet Nadil is too late in warning the Jedi there. Empress Teta grants amnesty to all of the rebels and prisoners that opposed her in the Unification Wars so that they can fight alongside her against the Sith with everything they have. Now in partial command of the Sith fleet, Gav goes down to the surface of Sinagar to try and find his sister. First, he finds Arba the Hutt, who spits on him for being a traitor, but before Gav can really do anything about it, his Sith Masasi guards kill the Hutt in retaliation, and Jory arrives just as this happens, witnessing Arba's death. Believing that it was Gav that killed Arba, she declares that he's no longer a Jedi, and she confronts him with a lightsaber that was given to her by Odin Going into issue 4, Jory tries to run down Gav, telling him that he has a lot of explaining to do, but Gav flees. Having grown disillusioned with the Sith Empire because of the things that it has forced him to do, Gav jumps into hyperspace to Nagasato's meditation sphere, where Sato is controlling his forces. Gav uses his ship to blast and damage Sato's sphere. Sato, who is now enraged, convinces Gav to come aboard his meditation sphere to discuss things man to man. Once Gav boards the sphere, he discovers that Sato is gone, but has activated the solar flares of a nearby star to destroy the sphere. Gav has just enough time to warn his sister to get out of range of the flares because she followed him there, and the star destroys the sphere with Gav inside. Sato's battle meditation has now been broken, and across the greater galaxy, this means that the illusions that he had conjured to fight the Republic have now disappeared, so the Republic is able to get the upper hand across all of the battles across the galaxy. However, on the planet Kirik, Odin master Uru sacrifices himself by breaking the glass barrier that was keeping him alive, and he draws the nearby Sith soldiers into the chamber's toxic gas to defeat them. In the final issue, the Republic forces are able to beat the Sith back all the way to Korriban now that Sato's illusions have disappeared. As Sato retreats back to Korriban, he is confronted by Ludo Kresh, who, surprise surprise, is somehow still alive, but Sato and Kresh's fleets do battle and Kresh dies for real this time. However, Empress Teta arrives on Korriban just after this to finish the job and make sure that the Sith are never able to bother the Republic again. Sato realizes that he's going to lose, and the Empress demands his unconditional surrender. Realizing that he really has no way to win this time, he uses the rest of his ships as a suicide blockade to ensure his own escape to the distant world of Yavin 4. With the Sith fleets destroyed and Naga Sadow presumed dead, the Republic celebrates on Coruscant. While Odin still says that he prefers learning to fighting, he decides to examine some of the abandoned ships still in Coruscant's orbit. There, he finds a Sith holocron, the likes of which he's never seen. Freshly inspired to continue his studies, Odin decides that he will build a great learning academy on Ossus, the world where his master trained him. The story ends with Jory taking up new ownership of Arba the Hutt's ship repair shop, stating that this is more than she or her brother ever thought that they could have. Overall, the fall of the Sith Empire was a fantastic way to end this era of conflict. The battles were beautifully illustrated and they felt very grand and very impactful, albeit a little brief, and I love the return of battle meditation, either side it was used on, and just being able to see these ancient Jedi in battle is just a really cool thing. The thing that I especially love about the Fall of the Sith Empire is how personal a story they still were able to make it for Gav and Jory. I liked how pivotal they were to the overall conflict, even if they were by far not the most powerful people present there. Gav kind of dabbling in the dark side and Jory kind of becoming a Jedi is a really cool, like, micro version of the light versus dark family conflicts that are so central to the Star Wars universe overall. And I do like the way it ended with Gav realizing that the Sith were wrong and his self-sacrifice, even if that ended up making the end a little bit bittersweet. I really like how the story ended with the Sith defeated in a way that their threat is eliminated for now, and the Republic and the Jedi believe that they are destroyed, but of course, we as the audience know that although they lost this time, Naga Sadow and his followers are still active elsewhere, and they will eventually recover and cause havoc, all the way up until the Clone Wars, when they will rule once again. Really sets up the Sith really well for future stories in the Knights of the Old Republic storyline and the overall Old Republic storyline, but honestly, you could go straight to the prequels and it would still kind of work. The Jedi, as usual, are of course just really fun to see in battle. I especially love Odin master Uru, he's like a jellyfish looking thing. I really love when they make Jedi that are of a really strange, like, unusual species, but still give them good abilities, or at the very least, they have power and strength and are well respected among the other characters. I always love when they do that. Yarl Poof and Oppo Rancisis come to mind for characters like that in the prequels that I like. I just love this general representation of Jedi like this anywhere in the Star Wars universe, not just because I love seeing cool and unique alien designs, but I think it gives a message that no matter how different you look, or how different your body is, or just how different you may be, there's still something that you can bring to the table. There's still knowledge and wisdom that you can impart, and you can still have a profound effect on the galaxy, even if you are a jellyfish in a glass tank. I just think it's a very Star Wars message told in a very Star Wars way, and I don't know, I love Odin and I love Uru, and even if we probably won't see too much of them in any other stories, they, I think, will be favorites. They are some of my personal glupshidos in my heart, and I will remember them for a long time. So, of course, while editing, I found something that I forgot to talk about. So, we see two planets for the first time in Fall of the Sith Empire, those being Yavin 4 and Ossus. Yavin 4, of course, is the planet, or rather moon, that the Rebels use as their main base in A New Hope, and we can even see in the film that the Rebels use the temples that the Sith Masasi servants built for Naga Sadow as hangars and shelters. As a longtime Star Wars fan, of course, it is very fun to point at the screen or page and see these things as they pop up, even if you do kind of get the feeling that this is the intention. I kind of wish we got a little more time on Yavin 4 here to explore how and for what purpose these things were built for, but considering that this is the end of a very already packed comic arc, I'm not really upset about it or anything. This is probably all just set up, and I'm anticipating that we'll get to explore Yavin 4 and its temples and see them a lot more in another comic or hopefully a video game pretty soon, like KOTOR. The temple ruins were very fun to explore in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, and I hope I'll get to explore them a little more in this Legends material. I also think it's poetic in a way that these temples end up getting used one day by the Rebel Alliance. The Sith Masasi are just slaves to the Sith, and while they are locked into servitude by the Sith and may never be freed, I'm not really sure yet, there is something really cool about the fact that another group will use these temples to strike back against the Sith one day. Ossus is also a really cool planet to see mentioned. I imagine that we will also see Ossus fairly soon in a comic, sooner rather than later. I'm ready to see a Jedi Academy planet, and not a lot of people know this, but Ossus is actually the planet that Luke builds his temple on in the new canon before it gets destroyed by Kylo Ren. I really appreciate how the new canon readapts old Legends lore like this, and the fact that I'm finally making my way through these old Legends comics, and I'm already able to draw connections to newer Star Wars media, is honestly really rewarding. Overall, I really love Golden Age of the Sith and Fall of the Sith Empire. I think that these are going to be more pivotal than we realize with the introduction of Korriban and Naga Sadow. And overall, I think these comics establish and inform a lot of how Sith are going to be depicted in later media, and I know some of these characters are going to show up or at least be referenced again. Overall, I've got to give Fall of the Sith Empire a 5 out of 5. I don't know if I'm going to give every concluding comic arc a 5 out of 5, but I just really enjoyed this one. So now we are going to take a look at a couple of short stories from the Lost Tribe of the Sith collection of short stories. These stories serve as a kind of prequel to the Fate of the Jedi series, which don't take place until after Return of the Jedi, so we're not going to get to them for a while, but other than that, they give us an interesting and different perspective of the Great Hyperspace War from the point of view of people who weren't really central players in the conflict, like Naga Sadow or Empress Tata or the Daragon siblings. The short stories in this collection take place in a lot of different points of time, but the first two take place during Naga Sadow's assault on the Republic, and both Star Wars Reading Order and Wikipedia place those first two stories in between issues 3 and 4 of the Fall of the Sith Empire comics for some reason, I guess because of how they start. But I'm just going to go ahead and talk about them now after the comics, because I don't really see a benefit in splitting up the comics just to talk about these just for the sake of the video. But just keep in mind that the events of the first short story kind of run parallel to some of the events and battles that happen in the comics. Anyway, our first story, which is titled Precipice, follows the Sith transport ships the Omen and the Harbinger as they are mining for valuable Lignon crystals for the Sith Empire. These crystals are used to enhance the Sith's connection to the dark side and can be used to make lightsabers that last longer and burn brighter than regular ones. For context, the people aboard these mining ships are Sith as well as some of their servants, and these Sith can all use the Force and all own their own lightsabers. Our story begins after the ship Omen has been heavily damaged and various parts of the ship start exploding and get sucked into space. It's basically just complete chaos. Suddenly, a Jedi starfighter finds the ships and attacks them while they're already vulnerable. The Harbinger then collides with the Omen just as it's jumping into hyperspace. The Harbinger then disappears into hyperspace, and don't worry, we'll get back to them later, but the Omen runs into a gravity well which just damages the ship even further. The ship is pulled out of hyperspace and it crash lands on the planet of Kesh and lands precariously on a precipice. This story then mostly follows the captain of the Omen, a human male named Yaru Corson, as he struggles to lead the survivors of his ship on this new world. All of the Sith's Masasi slaves die because of something in the atmosphere, they aren't quite sure, and this makes moving supplies around much harder as the Masasi were used for their strong labor. Yoru's half-brother Devor tries to kill him while they're both investigating the ship, so Yoru force pushes him off of the cliff. Between his ship crashing and his half-brother turning on him, this Yoru guy really just cannot catch a break today. Yoru is able to survive and make his way down the precipice back to his camp and to his people, but not before seeing a mysterious winged creature with somebody on its back. The next story, titled Skyborn, is from the perspective of Adari Val, a female member of the purple-skinned Kashiri species which is native to the planet Kesh. Their society is very religiously conservative, and they believe that a skyfaring race of deities that they call the Skyborn are the ones who created their land. Our protagonist, Adari, doesn't really buy into her people's beliefs. She's a geologist, and she is trying to explain to her peers that the land actually comes from volcanoes that slowly create new rocks. but this makes everyone kind of irritated with her, and she's kind of an outcast in her society. Adari is also a widow. Her late husband, Jari Val, is one of what is called the Nesh Tovar, a group of Kashiri who ride the indigenous winged Uvak. Her status as a Nesh Tovar's widow earns her some good standing with her people, but after maybe one geology lecture too many, she's basically run out of town as they attack her house, and she escapes on her late husband's Uvak. Traveling on top the Uvak, she investigates a mysterious column of smoke on a distant mountain where she discovers the Sith camp. Surprise, surprise, she was the one atop the mysterious winged creature from the end of the last story. She lands and tries to communicate with them, but when they talk to her, she becomes overwhelmed and passes out for like a day. It's implied here that the Kashiri and the Sith don't speak the same language, but what I also think is really going on here, which makes sense if you read the text, is that the Sith are using the Force to attempt to speak with her through her mind. However, because the Sith get their powers from negative emotions and negative energy, this makes her kind of freak out and she becomes overwhelmed, and that coupled with her exhaustion cause her to collapse. After all that though, she comes to and starts talking with Yoru Coruscant. After sharing information about their two societies, including the legend of the Skyborn, the Sith eventually decide to travel to the Kashiri civilization. Once there, the Sith, now aware of the Kashiri's beliefs, manage to convince the Kashiri that they are the Skyborn, that they are the deities of their land because they came from the sky. Their glowing red laser swords and ability to move things with their minds probably also helped to convince the Kashiri that they were gods, and I don't really blame them there. Also, because Adari was the one who discovered the Skyborn, everybody loves and respects her now, which is convenient for her. So the Sith now live peacefully among the Kashiri, but Adari decides to confront Yoru about the first time that she saw him, which was when he killed his brother by the remains of their ship on the Precipice. Basically, Yoru defends himself by saying that his brother was a danger to his people, and that in the Sith culture, murdering people isn't really so bad, and that maybe Adari should start to consider some of the people that have held her back and put her in danger before in life. Basically, they just decide to keep all of that a secret between the two of them from now, but Yoru also proposes to start to teach Adari some dark side force powers. So although she is now able to see the power of the Sith firsthand and possibly to wield that power for herself, Adari is still the only one amongst her people that doesn't believe that the Sith are the gods that they say they are. Alright, so my thoughts on those two Lost Tribe of the Sith stories. I'm gonna go and say I didn't really like the first one, Precipice, but I did really like the second one, Skyborn. There's just something about the first one I just couldn't really get a grasp on it. Something about the writing style, it was kind of hard to tell what exactly was going on at some points, because all of these characters have really kind of nonsense, Star Wars-y Glupshido names. I had to read a plot summary or two afterwards just to really understand all of the interpersonal relationships involved, because these are all characters that like know each other. And trust me, there was a lot more than what I gave in my plot summary that I just kind of had to filter out for the sake of clarity. Things I did appreciate about the first story mostly had to do with the world building. I really like the idea of the Sith being just a society made up of humanoids and pure-blood Sith, and some that are both, and sometimes other random alien species are involved as well. They aren't all these super powerful, formidable dark warriors. They're just all these guys on this ship in particular are just minors, but they still all have red lightsabers and can use the Force. Also, just a note, it seems that they like have modern lightsabers that don't require cords or power packs like we see the Jedi lightsabers. I don't know, maybe these guys just use them as super advanced mining tools. As I mentioned in the last video, I'm not going to be at all surprised when like little timeline inconsistencies like this pop up. I really like finding rationalizations and hand-wavy explanations for them, but I can't really come up with a great one right now as to why these guys have lightsabers that are way more advanced than the warriors on the battlefield, especially because the Sith mostly just use regular metal swords at this point, and the Jedi's lightsabers are not nearly as advanced as these. I do like this incarnation of the Sith because they are just people, and because of that, the Sith ideology is kind of watered down, but it's still present. Yoru still wants to provide for his people and be a good and responsible leader, which I would argue are kind of light side feelings. but he also really hates his brother and will kill him at a moment's notice if he finds a reason to, which is very dark side and very Sith-like. It's interesting to see how these dark side Sith principles about maintaining and taking lives for power mesh with things like compassion and responsibility that really all regular people need to survive, and I think there's like a cognitive dissonance there that I think makes a lot of sense for these kind of characters, and it's really interesting to watch that unfold. The additional world building that we get in the second story, Skyborn, I also really enjoy. I enjoyed learning about the Kashiri society and the themes of religion, and I always think it's interesting when Star Wars dives into religious themes, and I like the direction it went here concerning when religious dogma interferes with science and the dangers that that dogma can get into once certain powerful people are able to manipulate those beliefs for their own political ends. Star Wars, of course, has many very deep religious themes and influences, but I haven't quite seen the subject of religious beliefs tackled in quite this way and really quite as directly and in a way that is very reflective of our own lives and things that can happen in real life. All that is kind of something I wanted to see a little bit more of in The Mandalorian Season 3, because that's kind of where I thought that was going. Overall, I think I'll give Precipice 2 destroyed mining ships out of 5, and I will give Skyborn 4 mysterious flying creatures out of 5. Finally, the last thing that we are going to cover today is the novel Crosscurrent. So do you remember that other Sith mining ship that was with the Omen named the Harbinger? Well, it didn't just get thrown out of hyperspace. It time traveled 5,000 years in the future. So while this novel technically does begin right around the same time as everything else that we just covered today, most of it takes place in 41 ABY, which is after the Second Galactic Civil War, after the Legacy of the Force books, and which, to put it lightly, we're not going to get to for a very long time. I actually did end up reading the first few chapters of this book, and while it does start with the story of the Sith aboard the Harbinger, and the 2 Jedi that end up pursuing them, which are all characters that are important later on in the book, even in the early chapters it starts to jump forwards towards the future, and I may or may not have gotten totally spoiled on some very important character deaths that happen in or by 41 ABY. So while some of the events of Crosscurrent are definitely something to consider when thinking about this overall great hyperspace war era, I can't really recommend that you read this whole book if you're going to do things chronologically like me, and if you want to remain unspoiled for some major events later down the line, I just can't recommend it, even if some of that stuff doesn't happen for a very long time. Because of my experience with this book, I think I'm going to institute a rule that if a book takes place across multiple different time periods, say just because of that's how the story goes, or for time travel, or for maybe flashback reasons, I think I'm just going to put this book, place it on the timeline in accordance to where its latest events happen chronologically. So for example, for Crosscurrent, I'm not going to read the whole thing right now. I'm going to wait until 41 ABY to read the entire story. Although I am very serious about doing things in a chronological fashion and even being very, very granular in that regard, I really don't think that splitting up books in this way is really conducive to appreciating and understanding the specific story that an author wants to tell in a self-contained novel. Fortunately, there aren't that many novels or stories that are like that, and I don't think especially there are that many that use time travel, which is good because I don't really think that time travel fits very well in the Star Wars universe. Maybe down the line if there's like a comic series where one issue takes place really far in the past and the rest of the comic issues, which are still individual stories but take place later on in the future, I'll end up recapping those first comic issues so that we can kind of have it the best of both ways. I'm going to apply different rules to things like video games that have individual levels that take place across different time periods, but you know, we'll get there when we get there. Alright guys, well I think that's about it for part 11. Sorry it's a bit of a longer one today. Next time we are going to wrap up this great hyperspace war era with some short stories, and we are also going to find out what exactly our Sith friends on Kesh are up to after a few years have passed. Thank you so much for watching till the end if you did. Be sure to stay safe, and of course, may the Force be with you always.